Hi, and welcome to a #BetterHVAC podcast. My name is Ben Reed, and I'm going to take you on a journey through the chaotic and troubled world of residential HVAC through conversations with industry experts, frontline workers, policymakers, and entrepreneurs. Today, our guest is Judson Willis, a home builder turned coach who is doing something very exciting, which is convincing home builders and realtors to embrace building science and home performance. Just so you know, that's not a very common thing in the industry, so this is a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
And I myself, I'm not really that versed in the world of real estate transactions or home valuations at all. I'm excited to learn about this side of the industry because it is very unfamiliar to me. And Judson and I will discuss the journey that he took to get to where he is now, his new business model, and why builders and realtors don't typically value building science principles, and what the future might hold for him and this space. So with that, let's dive in. Judson, it is great to have you on the show. Thanks for being here.
I appreciate it. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity.
I'd come across you from a LinkedIn post. I think we talked about it last time, but I still don't quite remember what it was. Do you recall what that post is that you made a couple months ago that caught my attention?
I think it was from an NAHB post, one of the energy efficiency posts regarding more stringent building codes, energy codes are going to equate to more cost in the single-family residential marketplace. And I essentially had interrupted the post saying, that actually doesn't have to be. There are educative and innovative ways to educate builders now to say, hey, there's actually an offset for those costs that everybody's talking about. So I disrupted that chat.
That's what it was. It was somebody else's post. I think you had a couple likes or something like that. But what you said was just like, whoa, nobody else is saying this. So we connected. I learned that you're doing something really interesting. So I want to first ask you about, this is the question that I like to ask everybody, which is, why do you do what you do?
That's a question even my wife asked me. I can't even answer that. And a lot of things in life, I have like this gravitational pull towards just solving challenging riddles. And I say that because I actually never wanted to end up in the home building industry ever. I was actually getting out of the military, out of the Air Force here in Washington State, and I was having a house built. And it was an on-your-lot experience. So you go and you pick a builder, you go buy a lot, and then you essentially marry the two up. And I didn't know you had to act as your own general contractor in a sense, making the calls with the excavation companies and the well drillers, the septic installers. And so I had a full-time job with the military, and essentially they said, just make a couple phone calls, everything will be fine, your house will be built, you'll just be fantastic sitting on it.
So easy.
Yeah, just so easy, right? 5 phone calls. And I thought, wow, that's easy. Why is everybody doing this? And I was recruiting high-level medical professionals into the Air Force. So it was doctors, dentists, biomedical science individuals. And so it wasn't just going to high schools, recruiting kids and saying, hey, come join the military. So it was much higher level thinking. And in that, it was a very A to Z complex process. You don't just go and show up to University of Washington medicine school and say, hey, come join the Air Force. It's really good. I know you're going to make a lot of money on the private side, but no, come over here. It just doesn't work, by the way. And so I essentially had talked with the builder and said, hey, this process is quite complex. Why don't you go back and educate your borrowers and tell them, hey, there's a lot more involved and you should know this up front. And they said, why would we do that? Because then nobody would buy homes. If we make the process too complicated, nobody'd want to do it. And I thought, well, that's just not right. Me being me.
But it already is that complicated. Like, it is so complicated already.
It really is. And they're not misleading anybody, but I understand now what they're saying is that because it is so complicated, why would I want to go through all that? I'll just go buy a house and maybe not sit on any equity or minimal equity. But there is a lot of the golden brick road there to path of home equity is really good on new energy efficient home construction. But then again, there's this big component of that called education that was missing. And essentially, I was pushed up against the wall. I told them, I said, it's really not fair. It's not great. I wasn't explaining. They said, if you think you can do better, why don't you just come work for us? And I said, are you offering me a job? And yeah, that was how this whole thing happened. I wasn't looking for a job out of the military. I was still active duty. And so essentially in May of 2015, I had taken this job, and it was so funny because I was the #1 recruiter in the entire United States for the Air Force and medical professions. And so they had seen my past. They loved the way that I'm able to talk and relate to clients. And so they said, you're going to be so good. And they put me in a sales office, 0 training, by the way. They just said, oh, you can sell anything. First customer walks in the doorbell goes off. I'm super excited. I run outside and I go to meet them, and they said, hey, I got a question for you. What's the pitch of this roof? And I looked at them and I said, and they said, the roof pitch. And they did that. And I said, I don't, hold on one second. And I ran back and I called my sales manager and he ran from next door and said, he pushed me aside. He said, I understand. What can I help you with? And I thought, what am I even doing here? I don't even know. And so it was a realization that I thought, wow, again, education. And so I ended up learning from YouTube videos, from building science videos. I'll spare the names, but there's a lot of buzz around building science and home building. And I thought, if it's right there, why isn't everybody talking about it? And that's really what put me down this path, was just solving that challenge of let's educate our consumers. And long story short, I essentially became the number one salesperson in that company who had been around for years because I educated myself. And there wasn't a dwell of information on YouTube or Google about selling new energy efficient homes of Washington. I just put it all together, and it was me that people were sold on because I had so much information. And that essentially led me to bigger opportunities, sales management, and essentially owning part of that company years down the road.
Wow.
It was a cool experience. I got to see it from a micro level to a macro level, and then I got to experience the marketability of it, the financial side of it, working with the lenders, which then made me get my lending license because I kept asking all these lenders. They come to you and they say, hey, we want your business. We want to help you grow. And I said, well, that's cool, but what can you do for me? And they said, we're going to close your loans and we're going to be really good stewards of customer service. And I said, isn't that your job though? Aren't you supposed to be doing that? And so I said, help me out and pay for half my marketing. Oh yeah, we can't do that. We can't do that. And they said, I'm giving you business. Like, why can't you help me out? And I just challenged the narrative. And again, I'm not in lending. I'm really not even a home builder at this point. So
you don't know the rules of the game.
I don't. I'm not playing the box.
Yeah.
I challenged the narrative. And I was that guy that would just ask the question of why. Why is that? Oh, that's just the way it's been. And we can't do it. And there's guidelines and regulations against it. And I literally went out and got licensed. And now it took me three times to become a licensed loan originator here in Washington. But test is pretty strict. But I got it. And now, because I could look and dive into the information, I looked and I said, but you can. And it says right here that you can. And so to date, I've been licensed for 7 years in the state of Washington. And I've never closed one single loan, not one. But I became licensed so that I could have these conversations with the brokers of these banks and lenders and say, but you can do it. And it says it right here. And a lot of them didn't like that because nobody likes to be told that they can do their job better. And so now I again challenge the narrative to say, but if I'm going to give you the business that I paid for and I marketed, what are you going to do for me? Let's make this a symbiotic relationship. And so for so long, home builders had this bridge of disconnect with these lenders that they didn't know that they could actually have their marketing almost covered and work for in a joint venture type of effort. And so that was when I began selecting my lending partners to say, okay, I don't want you. And who's going to help me truly grow my business rather than the catchphrase of, oh, I'll help you grow it. That came to the point, now I've got all this buzz, and now the lending organizations had said, hey, we need somebody like you to help us grow our company and go reach out to all these builders because you speak builder, you're licensed, now you're like a deadly weapon. And in December of 2022, I got offered a very big position as a national building director to basically help build out a division for builders. And so I was misled in a direction to say that, hey, this is already built out. But I had to sell my shares of the builder because it was a conflict of interest. If I was getting compensated from the building side and the loan side, that is a violation. And so I had to make the decision that for the last 7 years, I've been in this sandbox, very successful in this sandbox, building energy efficiency homes. And I was in the community in which I lived in. So I made a lot of relationships with the trade laborers and the suppliers and manufacturers. So I had to uproot all of that again, just like my military days, and go into another industry that I really didn't know a lot about. And so it was uncomfortable, but I made the jump because I said, change starts there. If anything's going to change, I've truly got to make that jump to be the influence in that industry. And little did I know, it was a huge journey that I was about to embark on, but I ended up selling my shares of the company so that there was zero issues with violations of compliance. And that was the biggest decision I think I've ever made in my life because I was making really good money. I had a lot of good friends that I had made in the industry trades. And then just to make that jump, it was scary. And I realized that the lending world of things it's very type A personality. It's like throwing a minnow in a piranha tank. Everybody's going after that minnow. And I'm not like that. I'm very laid back, relaxed. I like to assess the situation rather than just dive in and, ask questions later. And it was a very big change for me at my point in life for that.
But in any market, when you have a saturation of everybody going one direction, The natural sort of progression is that there's a lot of people that are either exasperated or not interested with that particular way of doing things. And
Absolutely.
it's interesting that there hasn't been anybody else trying to take that out of the box approach to just be like, so this kind of sucks. Why don't we just do it differently? Everybody's just accepted the status quo for so long, it sounds like.
You're right on that. And that's really what I was disappointed about going to the lending world, because I almost like felt like a failure. It's how do you turn this giant cruise ship around? And when you really learn how the lending world works, it's all about relationships. And so even though you could have the best idea in the world and drop it in their lap, it's, well, can I get this in front of my friend John over here? It's sure. And then John tries to steal it because of that relationship. And it's, can't we just use this to better the entire industry? And that's really where I kept falling on deaf ears, because I told him, I said, look, I think there's something here. I just don't know how to put it together. But it's like what I tell people, it's like taking a 1,000-piece puzzle, dumping it out on the desk and throwing away the box. And that's been the challenge I've been presented with over this last 18 months of putting this together, because I kept getting told, you're going to die on that mountain. This is mission impossible. Many have tried before you, but they've never gotten this far. And that's, again, the challenge side of me. I was 40 years old. I'm 41 now when I took this on. And I said, there's got to be a way, though. There has to be a way. And I totally could have just stayed building homes, making really good money, and just staying in that box of comfortability like many do.
Oh, that's why the industry hasn't changed, because everybody else is doing exactly that.
That's exactly right. And then along the way, I had met my business partner, Steve, who, it was crazy. In 4 years of my life, I've never met somebody that is wired the same way I am. And he was a lender 22 years. He was very successful, mind you, as a lender. And him and his wife as a team, they've done thousands of loans. They're very sharp. And I'd had coffee with him because our paths had crossed with a mutual friend who'd own a brokerage. And so we just started talking, and I told him about all this building stuff, and his light bulb just went on. And that was the other side, the yin to my yang that I've needed to help push this effort across, because he understood at a high level of banking, who had been working with multiple banks at top banks, to say, hey, I know how to get past that barrier. Let's do this together. And so we had created the Home Building Energy Efficiency Academy, in which we're co-founders of today, to basically move that effort on a very fast forward scale, because we both don't just sit back and hear the word no and say, oh, okay, I guess it's impossible. We hear 80 no's before we hear one yes. And so through this effort, we had tried seeking grant funding and financial assistance through multiple entities for educational purposes. And we had continuously gotten thrown up against the wall saying, are you building houses, or are you aiding in down payment assistance for energy efficient homeowners? And we said, no, we're simply providing education for builders and lenders. And now what we found, the appraisal industry, and they said, we really don't have the framework built out to be able to lend or grant money upon that, but it sounds like a great effort, guys, keep it up. And so we said, are we going to have to self-fund this endeavor? That's a bummer, because with the Inflation Reduction Act and these billions of dollars that are being filtered down to the state level, surely there's got to be money for education. And there wasn't. And it was disheartening, because...
Wow. So the workforce development is a big part of, I guess, the intended outcomes of programs like the Inflation Reduction Act. But I know a lot of them are focused on a lot of the blue collar trades, or specifically like in low income housing. But home builders and lenders and realtors, they've all been left out of that equation.
A lot of them have, yeah. There's a lot of money that's geared towards building affordable housing, building energy affordable housing. But there's not these trunks of money available for educators to educate builders on how to build energy efficient. And a lot of that money is held at higher levels, and it's given to larger entities that don't have the bandwidth, or they do have the bandwidth and the reach, but they don't have the programs and people in place to be able to educate like they say they do. And that's been the biggest frustration on our end, is we've went to all these national organizations and said, hey, can we be your educational arm? Can we be your sounding board? Because we know there's a way to figure this out, but we just need your bandwidth and your reach to be able to collaborate with like-minded individuals, because we're just two people out of Washington State. And so we continuously got told, hey, you're on your right idea, right track. You're doing really good. And let us know if you need any help. And we said, we just asked you for help. We just said, okay, this is truly an effort we're going to have to go about on our own. And so we ended up paying for very expensive conferences on the lending side of things. We went to and flew out and met with the top mortgage lenders, the top builders. And we sat down with CEOs and CIOs and COOs and all massive level individuals and said, hey, we want to help put this together and we believe we can do this. It was a conceptual idea at the time. And that idea involved, if you build a better home, you should get value for it. And everybody agreed on it. The appraisers agreed on it. The lenders agreed on it. The builders agreed on it. And the builders said, we're being forced to do this. If you find that way, please let us know, because we'd love to be able to capture value on what we're doing rather than being told sticks are sticks and bricks are bricks from our appraisal partners. And that's really what kind of key defined our pathway forward with this Energy Efficiency Academy. After going to multiple large conventions across the U.S., we came back to Washington and we sat on everything and said, okay, how do we do this? What's our focus? What's our value prop? How do we basically just put this on steroids, for lack of better terms, and go full bore to it? And that was when we decided it really starts with the appraisal industry, because this is a very interesting industry where there was only about 59,000 in 2023 appraisers that are actively licensed in the United States. And when you look at it from a real estate professional standpoint, there's about, I don't know, I think it was like 1.2 million realtors, if I'm not mistaken, across the US, but there's 59,000 appraisers. And I thought, that's a lopsided ratio. Looking at how many licensed loan originators there are, hundreds of thousands. And I thought,
what's the actual ratio to create a sustainable market? Did you figure that out?
We haven't. If you divide it equally, which it's not equally, states like Wyoming, for example, are going to have as much need as like Texas. It's 1,000 appraisers per state. The bigger metropolitan areas and rural outlying areas, yeah, we thought, okay, that seems to be sufficient coverage. But as we started getting into this information, and then obviously the refi boom of 21 taught us one big thing, is that lenders are having to delay closings and pay costly points to their borrowers because loans weren't able to close on time because of the appraisal industry, because there's so few of them. And they were all saying, yes, it was bottlenecked horribly. And sometimes there was people waiting 3 months to close their loan because the lack of appraisers. And so to clarify that, it takes about a 4-year degree and a 2 to 2.5 year apprenticeship from what we've seen to become an appraiser. Oh, the barrier to entry is extremely high. It's not like you can just go and take a course and then have some oversight and then become an appraiser. It's extremely hard to become an appraiser. And so the scare of 2007 to 8, the mortgage meltdown, obviously sent a lot of them off, because there was a lot of people that went to prison and there was a lot of people that got fined for doing unethical things. When you've got a builder, let's say you're a builder and I'm an appraiser, and you come to me and say, hey, there's a couple different cost approaches to appraisal. And if you say, hey, I just endured $5,000 more per house in this phase, I really need these homes to appraise. When you could talk to the appraiser back in the day, before the Frank Dodd days, you could say, hey, I need these to come in. And you as the appraiser would feel compelled because, hey, if I say no, do I risk losing all this business out here? And this was a common denominator amongst many appraisers that have said, we were forced into very uncomfortable positions by these big builders and saying, if you don't do it, you're out. And a lot left the industry because they're just not made from that fabric. And then a lot stayed in the industry because they didn't participate in those unethical behaviors, but they've lived through 2007. They've lived through this latest crash here of the market, and they're very reserved. It's black and white with appraisers. There's zero gray area.
Like they basically lived through a big trauma and they never got therapy for it.
No, absolutely. The appraisers are like the last part of the loan process. You've got your consumer, you've got the lender, the builder, the real estate agent, and then you've got the appraiser at the very end of this train, the caboose, saying, you better come in and value. And if you don't, everybody's gonna be mad. So there's so much stress on these appraisers.
There's so many downstream decisions after that that are affected by like how well that appraiser did their job, the education that they have, whether they're uncomfortable like doing certain things or staying away from certain topics because it's just, oh no, that got some people in trouble in the past, so that's absolutely no touchy, can't do it. And so then that leads me to one of the questions that I wanted to ask is, why don't builders value building science and home performance? Why has that never been a thing that has traditionally been included in this appraisal and home valuation process?
That's a fantastic question. And that actually leads right into the next chapter of this story, where Steve and I had basically said, how do we get to that? How do we get appraisers to value more energy efficient construction above code? Because a lot of builders will just build to code. It's the most cost-effective approach. They say, hey, it's the house. The real estate team members will say, hey, this is all the market can bear based on consumer demand and comparables, because that's really what drives the market is the comparables. And so,
can you explain that for people who might not understand it?
yes, absolutely. So if I'm a builder and I want to go into this development and I all of a sudden say, I want to build 4,000 square foot homes with all the bells and whistles on them, but all of the comparable homes in the area might be 15 to 2,500 square feet and entry-level homes. Those homes would not appraise because there's no comparables to essentially compare them to. And when builders go into areas, they want to see, is there growth? Is there movement in the consumer? Are there consumers that need housing, first of all? Are they in apartments? Are they in condos and townhomes that we can take out and put them into our homes if we build homes here? If you build it, they will come mentality.
Because it's such a big capital investment that they have to make.
It is.
So much risk.
You're right. And it's like what I call the iceberg effect. When you go to build out one of these developments, it just doesn't happen overnight. And in states like Washington, it could take 2 years to get a permit just to be able to break ground and build homes. And so you're not just based on right now market, you're forecasting several years out. And that could be very tricky because things could change. Market conditions can shift and change. And so there's a lot of stress and pressure on the real estate teams as well to say, hey, if I build this, can I sell it? Most importantly, because there's a lot of money involved with holding costs and investors that they want to get their money back as well. And so it's a pretty risky, dicey business going into an area where new construction hasn't been dominant in. And so if you know that there's a market and the dirt is relatively inexpensive, A plus B should equal C, but you're still taking a little bit of a gamble based on the market conditions. Like COVID taught everybody a valuable lesson, and then the market just completely shut down overnight. And while we can't predict and stop that from happening, there are things that can be in place. Market rates, for example, mortgage rates, they're up over 7 right now. It's extremely difficult for an entry-level family to, if not impossible, to afford a new construction home in most areas. And so I think the national average of new construction now is right at or a little over 500,000. And essentially, if you work the math backwards and your qualifying ratios on a 30-year fixed mortgage, somebody with no debt to qualify for a 5% down conventional mortgage has to make about $90,000 to $100,000 a year. And so it's offset and lopsided. And I won't spoiler alert the next chapter of our story getting to that, but going back to that's where Steve and I had said, how do we fix that? So we started cold calling and just running down lists of accredited or certified green appraisers in the United States. What we found very interesting is that there was 3 entities that provided green certification, and they didn't have lists. They didn't keep lists of such training of these appraisers. And so we thought, how do appraisal management companies, AMCs, know who's taken the training or when they've taken the training? So we open up this can of worms into a whole other thing where we're saying, whoa, let's just say there's this great pool of certified green appraisers. How do you vet them? That was the next question, because there's so many different building approaches of building science and energy efficiency and high performance. How do you vet them? And so it just opened up this whole other can of worms for us to now we started asking appraisers and saying, when did you take your green training? Oh, we took it about 7 years ago. Hey, have you taken a green assignment since then? No. Oh, why'd you take the training? It was cool. It looked great at the time. We heard some buzz about the green stuff, and we just decided to take it because every 2 years they've got to take continuing education to keep their license. So they said, we don't want to take the normal trainings.
And there's probably some incentives too, like where the government was just like, oh, here's a discount, or maybe the state provided a subsidized access to that training.
That'd be interesting. Actually, I'd put that on my list of things to look at.
In incentive programs, a lot of them will just go ahead and put a little bit of resources into each section because it is very important that all the way through the chain, everything is taken care of, or else the downstream effects can be pretty bad based on the market conditions we have right now.
Okay.
But if you don't do it with every step having the appropriate amount of care,
right?
Where, like, I was reading a study about how with the last big incentive push into national weatherization and heat pumps, when they went back and looked at how all these contractors tooled up and got some training, there was no quality verification. And so a lot of the homes ended up causing carbon monoxide poisoning. They ended up having equipment that broke down a lot faster because there wasn't enough care put into ensuring that the contractors that are doing the work have the skills to do those installations to the quality that they require for that program to be effective.
Right.
And so I think anytime, like you said, that'd be interesting to study to see if there was some sort of a boom at one point that encouraged green training, but then there was no follow through. That could have happened.
It was back in the 80s when it was being pushed, and there was all this focus around that. And the solar, a lot of people, me included, 40 years old, I was born in 82. And so there was a lot of push in the 80s, and a lot of these older generational appraisers who are now in their 50s and 60s were taught this. And the problem, though, and this is the big missing link, getting back to that question, education. There was the lending partner, GSEs, the government service enterprises, Fannie and Freddie. They never accepted green approaches to these valuations of homes, meaning you could certainly say, yes, it's worth more, but do the lending authorities allow it? Do they acknowledge it? Do they recognize it? And that was the showstopper forever. So in other words, if I'm going to buy a home that's, say, valued higher against its own comparables, saying, hey, this home is built better, it performs better, and here's the data saying why, you couldn't sell that on the secondary because there's no guidelines that allow it. So that was for years and decades, that was the big debacle, is that you've got appraisers that are wanting to do this. You've got builders that are doing it. You've got appraisers that are saying, hey, there's value here, but we can't do it. And so it wasn't until April of 2022, Freddie and Fannie revised and updated their guidelines. And they basically said, sure, we'll allow it. Black and white, right there it is. And this was the interesting thing is, again, we're in about probably about July, August of 2023, Steve and I, and we're meeting with these big lenders and at the top of the food chain. We're sitting down with our senior underwriters and we're saying, hey, do you know about this change in the guidelines? And they had no idea. They had no idea.
Interesting.
And we literally showed them a energy report from ResNet, which is a FERS report, a home energy rating score. And we'd said, have you ever seen one of these? And they said, what is that? And these are the top lenders. And they have their own AMCs. And we went to their appraisal managers and we talked with them and they had never seen this. And we said, there is a lot of work to do here. And that's really when we put our head down below our shoulders and said, man, if the lending partners don't know about this, there's a big opportunity, but there's a lot of work to do here to educate an entire lending industry that has never seen an energy report. Their appraisal companies that they happen to own have never seen an energy report. How do you educate underwriters and processors and loan originators and their AMCs to understand that, hey, this is allowed now? And so we put that on the back burner and we said, okay, let's go create and focus training. Because what we found is when we took some of these trainings from these entities, they teach you why it's important and what green energy efficiency is in building science, but they don't teach you how to really evaluate that. So that's when we had to take an approached effort to say, okay, let's go and, back to my background, recruit top industry talent and combine and co-author and write training to basically help these appraisers get that extra step of knowledge and show them and gain the competency, really is what it comes down to. And USPAP, the governing authority for appraising, they don't care about accreditations or certifications. That's a cool piece of paper and some flashy initials to put behind your name, but really it comes down to competency. And competency, the best way I explain this to anybody I talk to is I'm a licensed loan originator, yet I've never closed one loan. So if you came to me and said, hey, my friend John wants to buy this home, can you do his loan? I would simply tell you no, because I've never done one. I will screw the process up because I don't know how to do it. And that is me being forthright and upcoming in honesty and ethical, saying, I don't know how to do it, but I'm licensed. That doesn't make me competent. Having a license does not make you competent. It's like the age-old thing of having an open heart surgery. Everybody's licensed and they've gone through the fellowship, but are they competent? Have they actually done one? If I'm over here talking to a guy who's done 10 of them this year and talking to one who hasn't done one, I'm probably going to go with a guy who's done 10 based on experience and competency.
This is very similar to some of the conversations I've had recently with technicians and educators within the HVAC space, residential HVAC, where we've been talking about creating a directory of contractors that have been verified to be able to do really good work. And on one of the podcasts I did recently, I had Clifton Beck from ESCO, who had talked about how Google is making an integration with ESCO to be able to validate that your HVAC contractor, if you're looking for a heat pump install, you can actually get an API-driven verification that HVAC contractor, they're employing a technician that has gone through and gotten the heat pump certification.
Correct.
So it's good, but it's still, to your point, it has to do with it's an accreditation and not competency. because there's so many different layers of ways that training can be delivered. And then once they're in the field, though, like, how do you actually prove that they're doing good work? And one of the ideas is, I do a lot of work with MeasureQuick, which is, it's like literally a quality assurance platform for HVAC systems, so that you just hook up a bunch of probes and then you get a score that tells you just how well it's performing. And so if a contractor shows up at the house and performs a MeasureQuick benchmark, then now you have empirical evidence of whether or not they've done their job correctly. And so for us, we're, as a part of this group, this Better HVAC group, trying to determine how do we create that contractor directory. We're starting to lean towards, okay, maybe there needs to be a flavor of either software or proof, where it isn't just a homeowner saying, yep, hot air is coming out of my vents, and they were friendly when they did their work. Like, they have no idea what quality installation or what building science, like what it means. And so they don't know how to gauge what quality is.
Right.
So it sounds like it's the same type of problem that you guys were facing.
It really is, yeah. And I didn't really think of competency as a term that can be unilateralized across multiple platforms and multiple industries. I just thought competency is common sense. Everybody should want to do it and do it right, but it's not the case.
Yeah, and there's an industry definition to it that I think is like by some government entities, especially when they're doing workforce development, if they say competency, it's almost like capital C competency because it has a metric to it.
Yes, I completely agree. And diving in further to that, we had cold called about 122 green appraisers that were certified, taking the training. And because of the guideline changes that say, hey, you can use an energy report, an energy rating score, to assist in valuing these homes despite a lack of comparables. And that's big language right there that basically gives you the green light as an appraiser to say you don't necessarily need comparables if you have the data to justify value. And that comes down to competency. And that's when Steve and I went, there it is right there. That's the aha moment. Like, we have it. And so we started calling these appraisers and we said, hey, do you have competency to take on a green assignment? Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I'm accredited. I have that designation. Hey, great. So if we were to give you an energy report, would you be able to deduce the valuation and come up with value, possibly perhaps additionally higher than the compare? And they said, does it have solar? And we called hundreds of these appraisers, and they all mostly said the same thing. Does it have solar? Does it have a PV system? And they said, what does it matter if it does or not? Because you have to have comparables, and if the other homes have solar or don't, it's like a physical...
That's their measuring stick?
Yes. That's so when everybody thinks green, they think solar. And we thought, but what if the home doesn't have solar, but it's built better, true building science, and it has an energy report? Because you don't need to have solar on a home to make it energy efficient. That's called greenwashing, if anything. That's a logical fact. And so we got frustrated because that's what's being educated in the appraisal force. And we thought that needs to stop. That train of thought needs to stop, whether that's an old way of doing business that they were trained, but we need to fix that right now and there, because we know with this crystal ball, with the way that the government is pushing down energy efficient stringent codes, this is going to be a big issue because, again, of the barrier to entry in the appraisal industry and then the forced mandate from this energy efficiency. And these builders are just in the middle of this, just swimming around saying it costs too much, it's too much, we're going to lose out and people won't be able to afford homes. You've got a very big disconnect with multiple industries. And all we were trying to do is just to bridge these industries. By now, it was clear what we had to do. We had to create competent appraisers from education that we had to go and write because nothing else existed. And that's what we did. And so we created the chicken, if you will, with the 11 ingredients that now it never existed. And we created the first of its kind education to literally make an appraiser competent through multiple, there's other things. It's not just the education, because you have to be experience competent and you have to be educationally competent. And so you can't just take this magical course and go, hey, I can take these assignments, because that's not correct at all. But then what we needed to do was, okay, now we've got the chicken. Now we need to go sell the chicken. How do we sell the chicken? And so we started calling these the appraisal management companies. In some cases, we went to a convention and we actually sat with the owners or business development directors of these appraisal management companies and said, hey, we've got this training. Would you be willing to host it and get it out to your appraisers? Please help us out doing this, because we don't have the platform to do that. And they all looked at it and they said, this is fantastic. This is great. Yes, we'd love to do it. And then we said, can you create an internal panel of experienced green appraisers with competency so that they can review junior appraisers or ones that just took this education, make sure they're doing the right thing. And that's when two of them right away said, what do you want us to do? We said, well, we want you to build a panel inside of a panel, essentially, to create oversight. They said, yeah, sounds like a lot of work. He said, you can't just, like me, you can't just take a test, pass it, and expect to go out and do loans and do them competently. And so you've got to have a senior loan officer or somebody above you to review your work and expect that it's going to be taken to a grain of salt because you're brand new. And so we had one AMC, a large one, that said, hey, we'll absolutely send this out. They set out the training, and we had to put a value on it. Obviously, all up to this point, we'd worked for free. We haven't made a penny in our efforts of research and development. There was no grant money available, so we just self-funded this whole endeavor. And we said, hey, this is the value of this training. We had hired an individual to create a learning management system, a very easy learning management system for these appraisers to take now. So it's not like a Microsoft PowerPoint. This is a very professional endeavor. We had sent it out there and no people took it. Nobody. Tens of thousands of appraisers. Nobody took it. The first question was it accredited? Can I get continuing education hours? And if I take it, what business do you have for me? And we thought, do you want us to do your job too? Like, we've created education that doesn't exist, shown you an option and saying that builders are demanding this, but it's like the chicken or the egg. If you train a workforce of tens of thousands of appraisers and tell them the business is out there without giving them the business, they're going to be upset. And so if you go to the builders and say, hey, we can finally show you how to take advantage and get better value for what you're doing, and then they say, great, let's do it. And then now we have to go and educate tens of thousands of appraisers for the workforce. So we were caught in this conundrum of, what do we need to go and get appraisal licensing and create an AMC now? And then, I mean, it's just, what do we do now?
How far do we have to go?
Yeah, we thought we'd put this puzzle together, and now you've just surprised, here's some missing pieces that we didn't include in the box. And we started just dialing down the list of appraisal management companies, and we started with the numericals all the way from A to Z, and there's about 332 of them. And so we said, let's just chop it up and call 5 or 10 a day. And we didn't, thankfully, have to get too far down that list. And we had called the president of the AMC and we said, hey, just hear us out. This is what we've done. And he said, I'm interested. Can I take a look at the training? And we said, we understand that you're going to have to see it eventually, because obviously if you're going to be putting it out there, then you have to have full buy-off on it. And we said, yes, we'll comp the training for you to be able to take it. Only because he had taken green certification training. He himself was a green certified appraiser who owned the company with thousands of appraisers on the panel. And so we said, we'll do that. In spite of, you can just take this and, run with it. We'll let you do it. And he wrote back and he said, I want it. Can I buy it?
Ooh.
Like, I want it. And we thought, oh, this is great. There's something there. So we started having discussions and talks. And we said, we don't really want to have to call down this list of like hundreds of appraisal companies. Let's talk about you working with us and then launching this, slow roll this out, beta test it with a couple builders, and then just make sure it works, because we haven't tested it. We think it can work, but because we're in compliance, we meet the guidelines, but can it work? And then, because again, the guidelines were just updated on the GSEs. So Fannie and Freddie had just allowed this. So nobody's ever done this before. We're entering uncharted waters that nobody's got in. And so we started calling a couple builders that I know, saying, hey, if we pay for the appraisal for your client, can we see if this comes in at an expected valuation? So then what would happen is they would put an appraiser through the education. Generally, we started with appraisers that already had certification. That way, it wasn't like a crawl to run a process. Yep. These individuals have been appraising for dozens of years. They've already gotten
competency.
Competency, yeah. They took it and they said, this absolutely makes sense, yes. And then they were able to show value based on how they were trained to do it through commenting and say, yes, this deserves a higher valuation, and here it is. And we said, wow, that was 3% higher than your own comparables. And so we proved it. Okay. Then the next step was, can it get all the way through the process? Not just stop there and say, okay, it works. And it went all the way through based on the competency of the training of how to do it, not what or why. So that took a joint effort from now the CEO of the AMC to say, hey, I can help take the baton from here and work with the collateral and compliance and get it through the rest of the way. Because again, this has never been done. And so it took a very big effort on that, a couple more months. And now we're well into 2024 here now. We're right in January, and we go to a couple big conferences with the National Association of Homebuilders. We'd just gotten back from a ResNet conference in South of California, and everybody loved it. And so we'd start asking them, hey, can we do an appraisal with you? Can we go under NDA so that nobody else gets this information and we won't share it? But we want to talk about how this could help you in your being told or you're doing it and building a better home. We think there's value there, and we think we could show you how to do it. And we did that, and the appraisal was ordered, and it came back 3 to 9% higher in some cases, depending on how much more energy efficient the builder was. 0 out of 0 times did it ever come back less than 3%.
Wow.
Because these builders are
less than 3%. Wow.
3%. So if you're you're selling a house for $500,000, they at least came back at $515 based on the way they're building the home. And it's not about the solar. The solar helps, but most of these homes that we were evaluating had no solar. It's literally based on the sizing and correct HVAC systems, the tightness of the air envelope, the air sealing of the home, the stuff behind the drywall that for decades, appraisers and lenders and real estate agents have never been taught how to sell. If they're not taught how to sell it, how does a consumer understand, again, going back to education, which is why we were going after this grant money, because we had talked with Zillow and Realtor.com and said, hey, we think there's something there early in the phases. And they said, well, if you can show us true behavior changes from the consumer, we're interested. And so the consumers want this. Everybody wants lower utility bills. Everybody wants a better built house, but they necessarily can't quantify the value of how much more is it going to cost and can I afford that? And everybody wants low gas prices. Everybody wants their insurance to be low. It's just not. So how do you sell that to a consumer that it's better for the air indoor quality of your home, having air exchanges, controlled air exchanges, not sporadically going through outlets in your house or leaky windows? In your world, HVAC, you want to have a good performing system. And like you said, competency. Just because you can install it and it's behind the drywall, consumers aren't educated to ask those questions of, hey, are my ducts leaky? Can I see the duct leak tests that you perform to see how efficient my home is? Homeowners don't know this, which is crazy because it's the most expensive purchase they're perhaps ever going to have in their life. And what I always like to go back to is the redundancy effect of everything that we've been dumbed down to in life, meaning your cell phone. When the battery's low, it says, hey, charge me. When your car is low on oil, an indicator light comes up and says, add oil. When you're low on gas, the gas light comes up. But there's nothing in a house that says, hey, your home is performing inefficiently and there's a mass amount of emissions or off-gassing from product that you put in your house that you're breathing in. And so and that's why I really love building science, because it's this big world right now that is starting to come out and educate consumers through trade shows, through podcasts like this to say, hey, this is something you should pay attention to, but not just that, but why? And when you look at the exact medical correlation of childhood asthmas and all these conditions that are now all of a sudden becoming more prevalent in the spotlight, the science is now starting to connect a lot of that and say, hey, it's perhaps the way that we're living in our homes that's causing a lot of these issues. And without getting into all the scientific stuff, that literally is a correlation. And that's why I'm so passionate about what I do. I don't do it for the money. Like I said, I've self-funded, Steve and I have self-funded this endeavor literally up to this point to where we've said, hey, this is important research and this is why. And then nobody else has done this. And we've picked up the baton from these 60-year-old appraisers who have said, please do something with this because we've been waiting decades. And now that the lending partners allow it, next month is a very big month at the Capitol because Congress, the 117th Congress, is opening Senate Bill 4671, which is now essentially a gateway to telling everybody, yes, you can allow more green valuations through essentially like allowing green valuations to value your home. Now, they didn't say it's going to come in higher, the same, or lower. They just said, we're going to simply review it, read it, and if it passes, maybe that's what it's going to take the U.S. to say, hey, we can do it now. The government said we can do it.
Yeah, but what you're doing could be used as a case study as a part of that discussion.
Absolutely. And we've worked with very large organizations and entities, both nonprofit and for-profit here in the U.S., and we've provided the data willing that the individuals that were willing under NDA to share that data with them to say, hey, this is what we've provided a case study. We've written a white paper, it's been reviewed, and it's been very heavily scrutinized to a degree because of the education factor, because mostly from the appraisal industry, because it is so fragmented. You have individuals saying AMCs are horrible, they control too much, they tell us what to do, they outprice us, and then the independent appraisalship is where it's at. And that's okay and that's good, but if they're truly getting the education. The thing I like about the AMC world is that if it's a good AMC, a lot of that information can come top down. Whereas in this case, we have an ambassador of green who has taken the training, who has said, hey, guys, I've seen that this works. We've worked and done case studies with multiple top 10, 20 national builders against their own comparables. And when we're saying that, we essentially had an appraisal conducted on one of their homes. They selected the home. We didn't select it. And in some cases, we had to competently educate an appraiser in that area because we didn't have one on the list, on the panel. And so it was always against a sold, not pending home. So for the record, this was still an open home. There was not sold yet, but it was pending. There was an appraisal conducted on it with their joint venture lender or the borrower's lender. And then we had our appraisal. And that's what we're saying the difference was at least 3% against their own home with the borrower's lender's appraisal, which is huge.
Wow.
Because it shows that it works. Yeah. And when this came back, the jaws just hit the floor from the builders and they said, this is crazy. Let's talk about this more. And that opens up another can of worms because then we were faced with the joint venture lending partners. Again, it's a cruise ship. They didn't understand it. They don't even know that the guidelines have changed. And so now we're having to become a consulting arm to them to say, here's what we've done is that we've gone out and done all this research. We've created the education and we've parked it, for lack of better terms, under this AMC. And there's multiple reasons why. And the biggest one comes down to accountability, competency and accountability. If this education is going to get out there, there's ways that this can be manipulated for worse. And I, for one, don't want to be at the forefront of another mortgage meltdown of fraud because the valuations are only as good as the data. And as the data is only as good as the person inputting it, until AI takes over the world and does that for us, there's human error that can be accountable for that. And so we've seen that this could go a very bad direction. And so therefore, that's why we didn't just say everybody can have it. And then now you have a loss of control that there's no accountability within the AMC in reviewing these. And that's why we've essentially worked with the one AMC right now to say, let's go out and grow this and show that it works so that we can stand up on any witness stand, raise our right hand and say, yes, we know this works and this is why. But there has to be measures put in place to make sure that data is accountable. And Fannie and Freddie both agree to that. And that's why the Green Mortgage-Backed Security Bond was created with a separate group of investors on Fannie's side to say there's got to be these checklists that have to be performed to validate that data. And we've taken a different road saying you don't necessarily have to have all these checklists, but you do have to have a report, which the guidelines say, but then that report needs to be accurate. And that's where it comes down to the quality assurance and competency of that data. And so it's been a closed effort in a sense, meaning we've parked the training under one AMC. And then I was recently hired as a national director with the National Mortgage Company to help build that out so that now we could work with their builders and say, hey, let's roll this out and see if we can do this. And it's been proven. We've proven it now.
There's something that you talked about there regarding data and responsible execution that I find very compelling because in today's day and age, when somebody unlocks a secret to shift a market, there has been such a trend where that person is compelled to try to scale it with all this investment in software and be like, grow fast, let's just try to exploit all the value as fast as we can. You chose the slow path because you understood the problem well enough and you understood the impact that if it was executed without that responsibility, that it could lead to many more problems down the line. That is not very common. I hear somebody who has that uncovers such a large opportunity and then chooses, instead of being like, oh, I'm just going to use this to build something really big that's going to be super successful and make me feel good about it and maybe help make sure that I'm taken care of for the rest of my life. You chose the other path, chose the responsible path.
I appreciate that. It wasn't an easy decision. And my wife often says, where is this leading? And I said, to much bigger things. Honestly, it is. Because when you look at what's doing right and what you can do, yeah, we could have sold this off to anybody and sold it for cheap and it could have been completely mismanaged. It could have been put in the wrong hands and data been invalidated. And then essentially hundreds, thousands of mortgages could have been fraudulently written because it's so new. You're going to have those early adopters that jump on and say, we want it, we're hurting. Because the way that this program could work is that if an individual is faced with qualification issues on income, and you could now know that the builder says, if we could give a concession to a borrower to help them qualify or help them get below a rate that they can now qualify, they do it. But the thing is, builders aren't not-for-profit. They're for-profit. They want to make the money. Their margins are already pretty low as it is because of all the impacts of labor issues and the workforce development. So they're having to pay more and more because, sidebar, when your average age of a framer here in Washington State is 51 years old, that's 10 years older than me. I don't want to be on the roof pounding nails in the cold. It's cold here. And so they can almost demand what that labor pricing is. And it's like gas pumps. When one station goes 10 cents up, the rest of them follow because they're like, hey, there's still cars getting gas. Let's do the same thing. And so that's the same thing in trade work, is that you'll always have the one that comes in to get the business at very low, but then they slowly stack and increase their value because they're good and they're worth it. But that's essentially what we didn't want to happen. Was builders they kill the golden goose, for example. We show them and say, hey, you can give away a concession. If you're currently selling for 500, you could sell for 515, knowing the appraisal is going to be a little higher, and then essentially amend the price or raise your prices and then give that concession buy down to help people qualify and sell more homes. Because you're building a better home, you should get valuation for that. But essentially what we saw could happen is that builders just increase the prices all the way up and they just keep increasing, which does nothing for availability, accessibility, and affordability.
That's happening in HVAC right now with the IRA is already, not specifically the IRA, but a lot of these now spool up attempts at heat pumps and the government creating demand, these programs creating demand for heat pumps. Homeowners are now being like, great, we want heat pumps, which is awesome. But we're starting to look at the data on the market. And I'm hearing a lot of people say that whatever the sort of rebate or subsidy is, that's a part of the program, that's exactly how much all the prices in the market just went up. Price gouging has already taken hold of the majority of the market, from what I've heard from word of mouth tales from people who are contractors, from homeowners, from some researchers and policymakers as well.
Really?
And so if that's already happening, like how do you combat that type of problem, like when it's already in the market, like it hasn't been caught before it happened?
You can't stop at all. And that's where it's a perfect storm, where you've got these supply and demand issues now, where COVID taught us a very valuable lesson that when the cost of a 4x8 sheet of OSB can go from $7 a sheet to $100 a sheet in a matter of a couple months, it's very fragile. And that price, we're hundreds of thousands of people out of the market just on wood commodity pricing. And so when you couple it with the cost of concrete, electricians and plumbers and roofing materials, everything is going up. On average, what we've talked with these builders is about 1% to 3% every year based on their workforce development costs and supplier manufacturer costs. And so that's where Steve and I said, look, if we can help offset that, and help the builders build more homes, and we'd ask them, if I could show you how to make 3% more right now, would you be happy? And they all said, yeah, of course. And I said, are your current lenders doing that for you? Of course they're not, because they're in that box of comfortability and they haven't left that box to truly help grow their business. The same old catch line I get tired of hearing. As their real estate partners, did they help them do it? Of course not. They sit there with their hand out and they say, hey, give us another lead, we'll close it for you. And so the frustrating part for us is that we sold our businesses. We stepped outside that box of comfortability and we solved a problem that had never been historically solved. And we're coming to these builders saying, hey, we've got a solution for you. And then we're met with objection from their lending partners and saying, we want to do that. And we want this. And we want our AMC to do it. And I said, that's not how this is going to work, because A, I've already reached out to your AMC and they didn't want anything to do with this at that time. Why would I give it to them now? And then B, we've already got this built up in a road paved of excellence and ethical, to where we're not going to allow anything malicious to happen or fraudulent, because we have oversight of that. As the Academy, it's our data, it's our information, it's our education. We have the right to do that. And so we've asked the builders and said, are you okay with making 3%? Based on right now the way you're building. And they've all said yes. Okay, don't get greedy and want to make 5% and 6%. So if we can help offset that, could you continue to build more homes for more people? And that's what we wanted to do, because if you listen to every politician and every builder and every entity, CEO of all these big organizations, they say housing affordability and housing availability are the two top issues right now in the States regarding housing. And so if we're simply able to come in and help solve one of those problems, affordability for a builder, where we say we can help you offset 3% of your cost, yeah, that's a great thing. And that's what we've done. And we've been met with objection from the lending partners because of joint venture agreements and not able to break down that barrier. So essentially what we've done is we've focused on small to medium builders that don't have these joint venture relationships and saying, hey, are you tired of the cost increases? And that's essentially where I've been hired as a national director with a big national lender saying, hey, I can help you do this. Let me show you how. And so we'll essentially go in with their first customer and show them the appraisal difference. And then they say, this is amazing. And then work with them going forward with their lending. And there's going to be a time when we have these discussions with these big lenders and other people will figure this out. We're not geniuses by any means. But what we can do now is control it in a way that it doesn't get misused or predatorily preyed upon. And consumers ultimately are getting screwed, excuse my language, because home costs keep going up and up. And so that's where we've just said we can start here. And again, slow roll it out and not just sell it out to a big organization and say, good luck with it, because there does have to be accountability as with anything. And so as long as it's done, it'll work. But that's been the challenge that we've seen lately.
So how do HVAC contractors interface with this? You have your lenders, your home builders, your realtors, your appraisers, but let's say HVAC contractors that would be involved in the discussion. Now that the builders know that they can get value for this, they're going to start pushing those requirements to the contractors, or they're going to start looking for contractors that actually value home performance and building science?
Absolutely. And me being an energy efficient home builder, living this for years, I never got the value. And in fact, I was told that coined quote, sticks are sticks and bricks are bricks. What do the comparables say? And so being that we've broken that mold and said you can actually get more value for building a better home, the quantifiable data is that energy report. It doesn't matter what entity it comes from, as long as it's an energy report that shows the value savings and it has some sort of a score to meet the guidelines. That's really where it starts. And in discussing HVAC, it comes down to having the right partner that understands how to correctly size that heat pump for the home to make sure that it is not oversized, undersized, that it's going to deliver exactly what it's saying it's going to do in terms of value savings for the borrower based on the size of the house. And then essentially taking it one step further, making sure that system performs as it should and that it doesn't have a leaky ducts and that it's put in correctly, or if it's a ductless system, is it sized correctly to do what it's supposed to do? And all those tiny little things add up in the big data report of energy efficiency that is used to value that home. In other words, if you have an energy rater that goes out, or the HVAC company is the energy rater, and they sign off, say it's 85 or 90% efficient, a duct leak check good, the energy rating company then will come in over again on them and essentially at framing, look at everything, check the test, yep, it's good. Then in insulation, they'll go in and they'll give a kind of a second look at it and say, hey, before everything's sealed up, let's make sure your top plates, your bottom plates, are they sealed, or your windows? Is there any issues and gaps with insulation?
A commissioning checklist.
It is, yes. And that's what we love where this is going, because it's accountability. And that's not saying the builders are intentionally doing something wrong. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that some of these superintendents are overworked and overloaded. And while they would love to trust insulation companies and others, sometimes things get missed. We're human. We make errors. And so this is just an extra step in that process to validate the data by these energy rating companies to say, yes, the insulation's here. And so far up to this point, the projected score that you were supposed to hit should be targeted. It's on target because of the way you've built. That way, once the drywall is on, it's like the last hurrah. And so then obviously at the final, they come back, they do the blower door test, and they validate that data. And they then say, okay, here's a confirmed rating based on your projected rating. And then that report is then given to that appraiser to say, I've validated the data. Here's all the pictures to show that in case you need it. Here's the score. We've signed off on it. It's good to go. That way, that appraiser can competently take that data and say, okay, I'm putting my stamp of approval on it, because based on the other comparable homes in the area, this is superior, and you should get data value for that.
And I know that it won't be the same because a lot of the stakeholders are different and the incentives are different, but is there a way to, I guess, apply this to the existing home or the retrofit market?
There is. This is where it gets really tricky, though. Two problems. One being workforce development. There's just simply not enough appraisers that are trained and educated for that, what we've been talking about. So that's the effort we're very focused and energetic on, is working through this appraisal management company and other big lenders that have appraisal management companies to say, hey, the training is out there. Let's go and get them competently educated. Because it's 1% of the new construction. I'm sorry, but I think was it 1? No, about 30% right now of homes being sold are new construction or transacted in the U.S. versus it's up drastically because there's just no supply. So when the rates do come down, because they will, everything's cyclic, people are going to be moving out of their homes and then moving into other homes. And it's going to create this demand now because we've been told energy efficiency. All the new home builders now, in one way or another, have to look at building energy efficiency homes, because whether the state has adopted more energy codes or it's been out there. Everybody's talking about it. So with the existing market, you now have to request that from the lender, which now has to have a competent, educated appraiser to be able to do that in that area. That is the trick. Where we talk about 1,000 appraisers per state, it's getting all of those educated to be able to do that. And then the step further, what I'm being told is that from an energy compliance standpoint, from an energy rater, you have to be able to grade the walls and prove that it's energy efficient. If perhaps a home was built in 2012 and they want to take advantage of an energy efficient mortgage or energy efficient appraisal, there has to be validated, justified data for that appraiser. And so the energy company would have to go out and perhaps perform these tests. And how do you do that when there's already drywall?
But I think that there's some really interesting developments in technology right now that could create a new class of worker that is specifically meant for collecting data, where they don't have the same level of competency or requirement to have the same competency as appraisers, because they need to be not only understand a lot of the physical elements, but they need to understand some of the financial side of things as well. One article that I worked with Jim Bergman on, I don't know if I sent it to you, on the workforce labor shortage endemic in residential HVAC and his proposal for 2 new roles. So one is this technical specialist that goes to the home they're equipped with a couple pieces of technology, digital technology, that allows you to do a full 3D model, a load calc, and then to benchmark the HVAC system within less than an hour. And it's all technology driven, it's 3D scanning with an app. It's using Measure Quick with a bunch of digital probes to be able to get the data from the HVAC system. If there was a collection of these digital tools that had high enough of that, like you said, that you called it redundancy, but the check engine light, where there's just all these now new digital tools, even the home monitoring, you have smart thermostats. I do a lot of home automation stuff, working on a project for an open source building science platform that could actually help with this type of validation.
Right.
But I'm really interested in if the existing requirements for the workforce for appraisers is still so high. And yes, you guys are working on a component to train them in the stuff that they need. We're still are going to be deficient of tens of thousands of people, because on the residential side, there's so much volume there that we're never going to get into it with the amount of workforce development that's needed. And so the approach of saying that, okay, we've done this for other industries, how about we make a new industry where it's this home data collection industry that is based around all this new technology. But one of the pieces that was missing is this type of slow approach that you've taken to make sure that the system can't be gamed. So that everything's done ethically, and that it is trying to take all those different stakeholders into the equation to make sure that the long-term impact is going to be what you want it to be. Do you think that's possible?
It is. I do. And in time, it's going to take innovators and outside the box thinkers to be able to come up with that. And I think we're right on the verge, like you said, of some pretty breakthrough AI technology that can. And I know there's companies out there. We were just at the Builder Show here in Vegas last month, where they can do 3D thermal imaging scans of the walls, make sure that insulation was installed correctly years ago without even having to take the walls out. I think it's a matter of time before that technology is introduced in through compliance and guidelines to say, we'll allow it, rather than ripping all the drywall out and then having to be more costly for the borrower, so that they can actually take advantage of energy efficiency. And so I know right now, I read a study, and forgive me the number, I think it's 60 or 70% of existing homes is what's really draining the grid of energy efficiency. It's not the new ones. The new ones are built very good. So if there's a way to tap into that industry, it's retirement wealth for somebody to put that together. And it is something we're working on the appraisal side to the lending side of that, and then which essentially would incorporate the remodeling side to that, which right now would be a fantastic time because nobody's selling their home, and the homeowners are sitting on more equity now than most ever. And so for them to be able to simply take out a home equity line of credit or open something up to where they could now make their home more energy efficient and thus save on energy savings, it's a win, really. If you're adding PV or solar, whether you're tightening up and getting rid of old leaky windows, upgrading your HVAC system, that's really what the effort is from the federal government to say, let's stress point and fix that, but there's so many fingers. There's a lot of missing pieces of that puzzle. And individuals like yourself, I love to be able to be on these podcasts to, hey, let's just brainstorm, let's collaborate, let's get out there, let's work with industry experts that are fragmented throughout the countries to say, let's figure this out because we're right there. And much like what I was told is, oh, it's a mountain you're going to die on. We've conquered the mountain and in a very short amount of time, I dare say. And so now it's just a matter of, like you said, putting it out there to where everybody can equally benefit. And really, mostly, it's that borrower. We want to be able to put the borrower in a very well-built home, not greenwash this. In other words, I say, build it like Swiss cheese and smother it with solar, because that doesn't do anybody good. But actually make a better built home for them and then reward the builder for that through incentives of higher valuations. And then essentially, really everybody wins. The builder gets a little more money. The real estate agent makes more money from the sale. The lender makes a little more money from the sale because these are higher valuating homes. And the consumer essentially gets a better built home, which then could be rolled with multiple concessions to help buy the rate down to entice borrowers to go and buy better built homes. If we can do that on the new construction side, I don't see why we can't do that on the existing side. We just got to get a little more trades and involved in this conversation.
And really diving deep into these stakeholder relationships, because I think that's the biggest challenge, is that what you found isn't that just education is needed, it's that you found that there's a very particular forgotten stakeholder that held such an important role in the process of getting this across the line. And you not only had to create the education, but then you had to create the activation. Like to me, it's like what you really are doing is activation, because like just creating the education is nowhere near enough. But you made sure that you did everything that's needed to get them to the point of being like, I get it now. I can shift my perspective away from the sticks are sticks and bricks are bricks and participate in this new system because you've shown that it's possible. So I just want to give you that feedback that it's so inspiring to hear your story of how tenacious you and then your partner like kind of were throughout this whole thing. And you saw something, you were convicted that it was there. You followed like a scientific process to try to validate it and to be able to collect as much of the information across all different aspects of the problem. And then you figured out the formula to solve the problem. You then made sure that it was ethically executed upon. That is just something that the market needs so many more people like that. And so I hope your story can actually be that inspiration to others like it was to me to hear this. So thank you so much for sharing.
I really appreciate that. And thanks again for having me on here. It's one of those things where you talk building science and energy efficiency and you automatically lose a large percentage of audience because they're getting beat over the head with it. You're like, oh, there's that green thing again. And I've gotten away from the word green, and we mostly talk about high performance. Everybody likes high performance, whether it's cars, internet speeds. Oh, show me high performance. And depending on where we're talking to builders at in the United States, that's where essentially we lead that focus on is, hey, higher performing, better built home rather than green and energy efficient. And you've already lost me. Really, all it equates to is building a better home, getting value for that. And that's essentially where I'm very active on LinkedIn. We've met each other there in saying, hey, I'll pay for the appraisal to show you this works with your own homes. And like I said, we're a 100 for 100. We haven't lost yet. And that speaks to the competency of not just the education, but like you said, the rollout and execution of this, knowing that this could have been misperformed in multiple steps, having the wrong appraisal partners and having the wrong lending partners to where not everybody understood this. So it does really take a village to understand that. And like you said, it's not just like a light switch you can turn on and stop with the education and say, oh, here you go, do great things. It really is that educational process to educate everybody that touches this piece of that loan file through the building part of it. You can't just rely on the builder to do that. You've got to have the builder rely on all 35 trades that it takes to build that home. And there's so much involved into that, where when I talk to initial builders and they're not having energy reporting done, but they're very interested and they say, hey, we want to do that because we keep hearing about this and there's incentives out there for us to do it.
Got some FOMO now.
Yeah, exactly. Where do we start? And we have no problem consulting with them for free and telling them, hey, let's connect you with a local energy rating company that can help dial that in for you, because we're not that expert, and nor do I competently say I am, but we can help show you the path of reward. In other words, if you do this and this, it will equal that. And believe it or not, there's a lot of builders that have reached privately out to me to say, hey, we want to do this. Like, how do we do that? And so there really is a need and demand for it, despite what a lot of bigger voices and influencers out there are saying. And you got individuals like Matt Reisinger who are doing a fantastic job out there, going to trade shows and talking about why the building science is important, not just about or how, not why or what it is. And it's taking individuals like that, going to that next level, and individuals like Mark Liberté with Construction Instruction, who have been out there for years doing this. I learned most of what I know from him and his team, because not just that it's cool and flashy, but it should be the way going forward building homes. Borrowers should have a better built home, and you should be getting better valuation for that. So really, it's the common sense stuff that we ask ourselves. It's why isn't that the norm? And it's changing the narrative to the consumers to create that change. And that's where we really need to focus.
We're creatures of story. So if you can figure out the language that resonates with the current zeitgeist, then that's the missing piece that so many people, like, you can beat people over the head with concepts and education all day, but the tailoring it towards their specific needs, the needs of the culture that is dominant at that point in time in history, is so important. So you guys have been doing that whole dance all the way up and down, solving all the problems. And I'm just really excited to see the results of this. Then the last question I'm going to have for you is this going to come up to Canada anytime soon?
Good question. When we were at the ResNet conference down in California last November, we had spoken with an individual from a very large home builder up there, and they're very interested in this because they do build in North America here and Canada. And I'd very much love to be able to figure out how to make that work there, because education is education. And it goes based on this. Building codes are different, climate regions and zones are different, but really, using that coin term, sticks and bricks, it's taking the same concept and just defining it to where it works in that region. And that Europe has been doing this for decades. This is nothing new. Building science for them, they're light years ahead of where we're at. And it's just, we're always used to being the last ones for innovation in that sense because of all these barriers to entry and these objections and roadblocks. And so I would very much love to work with building partners in Canada about this, because I do think this is the future. I know it is, based on how legislative pushes are mandating a lot of that. It's not going away. And when we look at the realization in front of us, energy codes aren't getting easier. They're getting harder to meet, and they're not going to go backwards. There's a lot of investors, there's a lot of time and energy and effort put into this. Whether it's right or wrong, I won't get on that soapbox, but it's right because it's getting a better built home. It's just the approach and how we get to that point is a lot of debate. And so in working with builders that build a lot of homes over the border there, I'd love to be able to have conversations about that.
Awesome. I'll see who I can find, and I'll try to send them your way.
Yeah, you bet. And two, know that we're definitely not taking our foot off the gas pedal on this. We haven't done this and sitting back going, oh, we did it. We're very active in working with real estate groups and lenders and even other appraisal management companies to say, hey, let's come together now. We've figured this out, and let's make this happen very quickly, because now we've got these control measures in place.
Judson, this was an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for giving your time to me here. And I am looking forward to connecting with you and having more conversations as we go forward with trying to transform our respective markets. But thanks again, and I wish you luck in all the stuff that you're doing.
I appreciate everything, sir. And thank you again for the opportunity. And if anybody has any questions or want to reach out, I'm sure we'll be able to guide them on where to go for that.